Did you know that some of the most important battles of World War II were fought in silent rooms, thousands of miles from any physical front line? They were fought with paper, pencils, and colossal machines that whirred and clicked, hunting for secrets. This was the intellectual war, a conflict waged in the invisible realm of codes and ciphers. The stakes were impossibly high. A single intercepted message, if decrypted, could reveal an enemy's plan, save thousands of lives, and change the course of history. But what if the code was designed to have more possible settings than there are atoms in the known universe? How do you even begin to fight a battle against mathematics itself? This was a war of minds. On one side were the cryptographers, the brilliant minds who designed these complex systems of secrecy. On the other were the codebreakers, an unlikely collection of mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, and even crossword puzzle experts who worked tirelessly to unravel them. They were the original hackers. Their work was so secret that their families and friends never knew what they did. Their victories were never celebrated with parades, yet their breakthroughs arguably shortened the war by years. How did they do it? What were these mind-bending codes they faced, and what ingenious methods did they use to crack open the enemy's most private thoughts? Number 15, how could a machine with 159 quintillion settings be broken? The Enigma machine, it looks like a typewriter in a wooden box, but it was the heart of the German military's secret communication system, and it was a monster of complexity. A standard army Enigma had 3 rotors, chosen from a box of 5. These rotors were wired internally to scramble the letters. You type an A, and because of the rotors, maybe a G lights up. The clever part is that after you press the key, one of the rotors clicks forward 1 position. So the next time you type A, it won't be G. It will be something else entirely. After a full rotation, that rotor would kick the next one like the odometer in a car. This alone created a huge number of possible starting positions. But that wasn't all. There was a plug board at the front. It looked like an old telephone switchboard. You could use cables to swap pairs of letters before they even entered the rotor system. So an A might become a P before it was even scrambled. Swapping just 10 pairs of letters from 26 possibilities creates over 150 trillion combinations. When you combine the rotor choices, their starting positions, their internal wiring, and the plugboard settings, you get that staggering number around 159 quintillion possible keys. Trying to check them all one by one was not an option. It would take longer than the age of the universe. The German High Command believed Enigma was, for all practical purposes, invincible. They were wrong. The story of breaking Enigma didn't start in Britain. It started in Poland. In the 1930s, the Polish Cipher Bureau, a group of brilliant mathematicians including Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rosiecki, and Henryk Zygalski, got their hands on an early version of the machine. They used pure mathematics to figure out the internal wiring of the rotors, a feat of incredible genius. They even built their own Enigma replicas, and a machine they called the Bombe to test rotor settings. Just weeks before the invasion of Poland in 1939, they handed over everything they knew to their British and French allies. It was one of the most important intelligence gifts in history. Like, this head start was crucial for the British codebreakers at Bletchley Park. Led by figures like Alan Turing and Gordon Welchman, they took the Polish methods and industrialized them. They designed a new machine, the Bombe. The Bombe wasn't a computer in the modern sense. It was a massive electromechanical device, a collection of dozens of spinning Enigma rotors, all wired together. It didn't try to find the key through brute force. Instead, it worked on a clever logical trick. The codebreakers needed a crib, which was a piece of text they were sure was in the message. A common crib was the German phrase for a weather report, wetterverhörsig, because they were sent at the same time every day. The Bombe would then churn through the settings, looking for a configuration that could turn the encrypted text into the crib. When it found one, it would stop, and the codebreakers would have their daily key. As documented in F.H. Hinsley's Official History, British intelligence in the Second World War, the intelligence from these decryptions, codenamed Ultra, was vital, especially in the Battle of the Atlantic, where it helped locate U-boats and protect Allied convoys. By 1943, Bletchley Park was decrypting thousands of Enigma messages every single day. The unbreakable machine was being read like an open book. What secrets about the Enigma machine are still buried in classified archives around the world? How many critical operational errors did German operators make that were never discovered, but could have been exploited? And what if the Polish Cipher Bureau had decided not to share their groundbreaking work in the summer of 1939? Number 14, what if the enemy's code was so complex, you couldn't even see the machine? Enigma was for the battlefield. But for the most secret, high-level communications between the German high command and generals in the field, they used something else. It was a machine the British codebreakers at Bletchley Park nicknamed Tunny. Its real name was the Lorenz SE-42. And it was a different beast entirely. It was bigger, more complex, and vastly more secure than Enigma. Unlike Enigma, which used a substitution cipher, Tunny used a stream cipher based on the Baudot code, the forerunner of modern binary. It essentially added a stream of random-seeming characters to the original message, and to decrypt it, you had to subtract the exact same stream. The problem for the codebreakers was immense. They had never seen a Lorenz machine. They didn't know how it worked, how many wheels it had, or how they were wired. All they had were the garbled, encrypted messages. The breakthrough came from a single, catastrophic mistake made by a German operator on August 30th, 1941. He had a long message to send from Athens to Vienna, but something went wrong with the reception. His counterpart asked him to retransmit. Annoyed, the operator reset his machine to the exact same starting position, a cardinal sin in cryptography, and typed the message again. Crucially, he made small changes, like abbreviating some words. He sent nearly 4,000 characters twice with the same key. This was the break the codebreakers needed. Brigadier John Tiltman, a veteran cryptanalyst, realized what had happened. He had two slightly different messages encrypted with the same key. By comparing them, he could cancel out the original message and be left with just the key itself, a long string of pseudo-random characters generated by the machine. The task then fell to a young mathematician named Bill Tooty. Over the next few months, using nothing but pencil and paper, Tooty analyzed that key. He found patterns. He deduced that the machine must have a series of wheels, and he figured out how many teeth each wheel had. It was a staggering feat of reverse engineering, a ghost of a machine built from pure logic. His work is detailed in the book Codebreakers, The Inside Story of Bletchley Park. But knowing the structure wasn't enough. They needed a way to find the daily settings for the Lorenz wheels. This task was too complex for the bombs used for Enigma, so a team led by post office engineer Tommy Flowers designed and built something new. It was called Colossus. Unveiled in 1944, Colossus is now recognized as the world's first programmable electronic digital computer. It used over 1,500 vacuum tubes and could read a paper tape of an encrypted message at 5,000 characters per second. And it performed statistical analysis, trying out all the possible wheel settings at incredible speed. It worked. A Colossus and its successors could break Lorenz messages in hours instead of weeks. This gave the Allies direct insight into top-level strategic thinking, including details that were critical for planning the D-Day landings. How many other unbreakable ciphers were broken thanks to a single moment of human error? What other revolutionary technologies were born in complete secrecy at Bletchley Park that we still don't know about? Did the designers of the Lorenz machine ever learn that their masterpiece was unraveled by a man with just a pencil and paper? Number 13. Could you build a copy of a top-secret machine just by listening to its signals? The Japanese government had its own version of a high-level cipher machine for its most sensitive diplomatic traffic. The Americans nicknamed it Purple. It wasn't a rotor machine like Enigma. Instead, it used a complex system of telephone stepping switches, the same kind of switches that directed calls in an automatic exchange. These switches created a highly complex and constantly changing path for the electrical signals, scrambling the text in a way that seemed random. For years, the Japanese Foreign Office believed their Purple machine was absolutely secure. The task of breaking it fell to the U.S. Army's Signal Intelligence Service SIS, a small and underfunded team led by the legendary William F. Friedman. Friedman is often called the father of American cryptology. He and his team had no machine to look at. They had no Polish breakthroughs to help them. All they had were the encrypted messages themselves. For 20 months, from 1939 to 1940, they worked relentlessly. They noticed certain patterns, For instance, the machine divided the letters into two groups, 6 vowels and 20 consonants. It scrambled each group separately. This was a tiny crack in the armor. Led by Friedman and a brilliant cryptanalyst named Frank Rowlett, the team began to slowly piece together the machine's logic. It was an intellectual puzzle of the highest order. They built diagrams of the potential wiring, testing hypotheses against the encrypted texts. It was slow, painstaking work that led to numerous dead ends and immense frustration. Friedman himself reportedly suffered a nervous breakdown from the intense pressure. But they persisted. Eventually, they had a breakthrough. They figured out the precise sequence of the stepping switches. They had reverse engineered the entire machine without ever seeing it. The story is powerfully told in James Bamford's book, The Puzzle Palace. By the autumn of 1940, the SIS had built their own working replica of the purple machine. They called their solution magic. From then on, they could read Japan's most secret diplomatic cables, often as quickly as the intended Japanese ambassador. They read messages detailing negotiations with other Axis powers, reports on American military strength, and crucial political intelligence. The information from magic provided President Roosevelt with a clear window into the intentions of the Japanese government in the months leading up to the attack on Pearl Harbor. While it didn't prevent the attack itself, the final message indicating the time and place arrived too late and was ambiguous. The intelligence was invaluable throughout the war. How did the Japanese engineers manage to create a flaw separating vowels and consonants, and why was it never detected? What other brilliant but forgotten cryptanalysts besides Friedman and Rowlett contributed to the purple break? And what if one small wiring diagram had been drawn incorrectly, sending the American team down a false path for another year? Number 12. How can an ancient language become an unbreakable code? Sometimes the most effective code isn't a machine. It isn't a complex mathematical algorithm. It's a language. During the war in the Pacific, the United States Marine Corps faced a serious problem. Their battlefield communications were constantly being intercepted by Japanese forces who were skilled at breaking American military codes. They needed a code that was fast, accurate, and completely unbreakable. They found their answer in an unlikely place, the Navajo Nation. The idea came from Philip Johnston, a civil engineer who was the son of a missionary and had grown up on the Navajo reservation. He spoke the language fluently. He knew that Navajo was an incredibly complex language with a tonal quality and grammar unlike any other in the world. Crucially, it was an unwritten language at the time. There were no books or dictionaries for the enemy to study. Even if they intercepted a message, it would just sound like meaningless sounds. Johnston pitched his idea to the Marines in 1942. After a successful demonstration, the Marine Corps recruited an initial group of 29 Navajo men to create the code. They didn't just speak Navajo, they developed a brilliant code within the language. For military terms that had no Navajo equivalent, they created a special dictionary. A battleship became Tene-nil, which means whale. A fighter plane was the Hitihi, or hummingbird. America was Nehima, or our mother. For spelling out names or places, they created a phonetic alphabet, assigning a Navajo word to each letter of the English alphabet. For example, the letter A was represented by the Navajo word for aunt, Walachi. To make it even more secure, some letters had multiple word options. The Navajo code talkers were a phenomenal success. They could transmit and translate a 3-line message in 20 seconds. A machine would have taken 30 minutes to do the same job. They were fast, accurate, and completely secure. According to Major Howard Connor, the signal officer of the 5th Marine Division at the Battle of Iwo Jima, were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. During the first 48 hours of that battle, they sent and received over 800 messages without a single error. The Japanese military, despite their skilled intelligence officers, never broke the code. It remained one of the war's best-kept secrets. The program was so secret, in fact, that its existence wasn't declassified until 1968. The original 29 code talkers were not formally recognized for their incredible contribution until they were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in 2001, as documented in Chester Nez's memoir, Code Talker. Were there other indigenous languages considered for this program? And if so, why was Navajo chosen above them? How did the code talkers maintain morale and secrecy while being unable to tell even their families about their vital role? And what other simple, non-technological solutions to complex problems were used during the war that have been lost to history? Number 11. Was it possible to build a truly unbreakable cipher machine? While Bletchley Park was busy breaking German and Japanese codes, the Allies were developing their own sophisticated cipher machines. They knew their enemies had skilled codebreakers too, so they needed something better. The American military's top-level machine was called Sigaba, and it was a masterpiece of cryptographic engineering. To this day, it is widely believed that no Sigaba message was ever broken by the Axis powers during the war. And Sigaba was developed jointly by William Friedman's team at the Army and Navy cryptographers in the 1930s. Its design learned directly from the weaknesses of machines like Enigma. It was a rotor machine, but its core innovation was how the rotors moved. In Enigma, the rotors moved in a predictable odometer-like fashion. If you knew the starting position, you could predict the entire sequence of rotor movements. This regularity was a key weakness that the Polish and British codebreakers exploited. Sigaba's designers wanted to eliminate that predictability. Their solution was ingenious. Sigaba had a total of 15 rotors, divided into 3 banks. One bank of 5 rotors was the cipher bank, which did the actual scrambling of the letters, much like Enigma's rotors. Another bank of 5 rotors was the control bank. The third bank of 5 rotors was the index bank. The output from the control rotors would determine which of the cipher rotors would move, and by how much on any given keystroke. This movement was not regular, it was pseudo-random. Sometimes one rotor would step, sometimes 4 would step. It was impossible to predict the stepping pattern without knowing the initial key settings. This one innovation controlling the movement of the main scrambling rotors with a separate set of rotors elevated Sigaba to a level of security far beyond Enigma. It solved Enigma's greatest flaw. The details of its complex mechanics are explored in David Kahn's encyclopedic work, The Codebreakers. The British had a similar machine called Typex. It was also a rotor machine, an evolution of the commercial Enigma design, but with significant security enhancements. Like Sigaba, it had more rotors than Enigma, and a more complex stepping mechanism. Typex was used for high-level communication between Britain and its Commonwealth allies. The combined security of Sigaba and Typex meant that the highest levels of Allied communication remained a black box to the Axis powers for the entire war. This operational security was a massive strategic advantage, allowing for the secret planning of major operations like D-Day without fear of leaks through signal intelligence. If Sigaba was so secure, why was its existence kept classified for so many decades after the war ended? Were there any close calls or near breakthroughs by Axis cryptanalysts that have never been made public? And what features of its design influenced the development of modern digital encryption algorithms? Number 10, what does it take to create a perfect unbreakable code? There is one and only one type of cipher that is mathematically proven to be unbreakable. It is called the one-time pad. The concept is surprisingly simple. You take your message or plaintext and convert it into numbers. Then you take a key, which is a perfectly random string of numbers that is at least as long as your message. You add the key to the plaintext number by number. The result is your ciphertext. To decrypt it, the recipient, who has an identical copy of the key, simply subtracts the key from the ciphertext. The security of the one-time pad rests on 2 critical rules. First, the key must be truly random. It cannot be generated by a computer algorithm or taken from a book. It must be as random as rolling a die or flipping a coin for every single character. Second, and most importantly, the key can never ever be used more than once. The moment you reuse a key, you create a vulnerability. This was the mistake the German operator made that allowed Bill Tute to unravel the Lorenz cipher. During the war, one-time pads were the gold standard for intelligence agencies and spy rings. They were used for the most sensitive communications where absolute security was required. The Soviet Union, for instance, used one-time pads extensively for its agents operating in Europe and the United States. They would be issued with tiny pads of paper, each sheet containing a key for a single message. After a key was used, the agent was to destroy the page, often by burning it or dissolving it. This made the life of a spy incredibly dangerous. If you were caught with your pads, the whole network could be compromised. If you ran out of pads, you were cut off from your handlers. The biggest challenge with one-time pads isn't the cryptography, it's the logistics. How do you securely get these huge, random keys to the people who need them? For this reason, they were not practical for military use, which required sending thousands of messages a day. But for a spy sending one crucial report a week, they were perfect. The American intelligence project, codenamed Venona, was a long-running effort, starting during the war and continuing for decades, to try and break Soviet one-time pad messages. They only succeeded, as detailed in the book Venona Decoding Soviet Espionage in America, because the Soviets got sloppy. During the pressures of wartime, one Soviet code clerk took a shortcut and generated and distributed duplicate one-time pad pages. This single, lazy act of breaking the cardinal rule allowed American cryptanalysts, over a period of more than 30 years, to decrypt thousands of messages and uncover the identities of numerous Soviet spies. Given the perfect security of a one-time pad, Have there ever been cases where a message was broken through sheer luck or a brute force guess of a short key? How many intelligence failures were caused by lost or captured one-time pads? And in the modern digital age, what does a truly random key even mean? And can we ever be sure we've achieved it? Number 9, could a code made with just pencil and paper be stronger than a machine? While nations invested fortunes in complex electromechanical cipher machines, some of the most secure systems required no electricity at all. They just needed a pencil, a piece of paper, and a very clever mind. One of the most famous and formidable of these was the Vic cipher. It was used by Soviet spy rings in the 1950s, but its roots and design principles are from the Second World War. It is considered one of the most complex hand ciphers ever invented. The Vic cipher, named after the spy Reino Heihanen, codenamed Victor, was a type of double transposition cipher, but with several layers of added complexity. It was a multi-step process that was tedious to perform, but incredibly difficult to break. It started with a secret phrase or sentence that the agent had memorized. From this phrase, the agent would derive a series of keys using a process called a straddling checkerboard, which converted letters into numbers of varying length. The process also involved a complex, almost random seeming sequence generated from the agent's memorized phrase, a technique known as a disrupted chained addition. The final step involved writing the message into a grid and then reading it out in a scrambled order twice. The result was a string of numbers that looked completely random. Its security was immense. First part of the key changed with every single message. Second, the initial key was based on a phrase known only to the agent, not a physical codebook that could be captured. The cipher was so strong that when the FBI discovered a message from a Soviet spy in 1953, they were unable to break it. For 4 long years, the message sat in a file, an unreadable block of numbers. It was only broken after the spy, Heihanen, defected to the United States in 1957 and explained the entire system. Without his help, it is possible it would have never been broken. The full, intricate details of the cipher are laid out in David Kahn's The Codebook. This shows a fundamental truth about cryptography. Complexity is not the same as security. The German Enigma and Lorenz machines were mechanically complex, but their predictable machine-like nature contained patterns and weaknesses that could be exploited. A well-designed hand cipher like Vic, with its multiple layers of obfuscation and a key derived from a memorized secret, introduced a human element of randomness that was much harder for a machine or a mathematical process to attack. It was a reminder that the human mind could still create a puzzle that even the most powerful analytical engines of the day could not solve. How many other unbreakable hand ciphers were used by spies and resistance groups that remain unbroken to this day because the creator never revealed the secret? Did the designers of these ciphers intentionally build in psychological traps for codebreakers? And what would it take for a modern computer, using brute force and AI, to crack a Vic cipher message without any known key information? Number 8. What was the workhorse cipher of the American Army? Not all codes needed to be unbreakable for years. For a soldier on the front lines, a code just needed to be secure enough for a few hours. The main tactical cipher machine used by the US Army and other allied forces wasn't the giant, top-secret Sigma. It was a small, portable, purely mechanical device called the M209. It was about the size of a loaf of bread and weighed only 6 pounds. An operator would type the message on a dial on the left, and the encrypted letters would be printed out on a small paper tape on the right. The M209 was designed by a Swedish inventor named Boris Hagelin. It was a brilliant piece of mechanical engineering. Inside, it had a series of wheels or rotors with a variable number of pins on them. The operator could push these pins in or out, which formed part of the key. As the message was encrypted, a rotating cage of lugs would interact with these pins, creating a complex, shifting path that determined the encryption for each letter. It was essentially a portable, simplified version of the principles behind the larger machines. The M209 was considered a mid-grade cipher. It was far more secure than simple hand ciphers, but it was not nearly as strong as Enigma or Sagaba. Its great advantages were its portability, its ease of use, and the fact that it required no electricity. An infantry unit could carry it into battle. Its security was considered sufficient for tactical messages, information about troop movements or supply requests that would be useless to the enemy after a day or two. The US produced over 140,000 of them during the war. However, the German military had a special unit dedicated to breaking the M209. They were quite successful at it. They understood the machine's mechanical limitations and developed statistical methods to crack the daily keys, often within a few hours. This is a crucial point in the story of wartime intelligence. The Americans knew the M209 was breakable. This is acknowledged in official U.S. Army technical manuals from the period. They made a calculated risk. They decided that the convenience and speed of the M209 for tactical communication were worth the risk of some messages being read. It was a trade-off between perfect security and practical utility on the battlefield. The intelligence derived by the Germans was useful for local battlefield decisions, but because the M209 wasn't used for high-level strategic plans, the damage was contained. How much did the German understanding of M209 traffic affect the outcomes of smaller tactical battles? Did Allied commanders ever intentionally send misleading information over the M209, knowing it would likely be read by the enemy? And what happened to the hundreds of thousands of these ingenious mechanical devices after the war was over? Number 7. How did resistance fighters send secrets with nothing but a grid of paper? Not everyone had a cipher machine. For resistance groups operating in occupied territories, secrecy was a matter of life and death. They needed a way to communicate that was secure but required no special equipment that could be discovered. One of the most common and effective methods they used was a classic of cryptography, the double transposition cipher. It's simple to understand but surprisingly difficult to break. Here's how it works. First, you need a keyword. Let's use the word secret. You would number the letters of the keyword based on their alphabetical order. C is 1, E is 2, the second E is 3, R is 4, S is 5, T is 6. So secret becomes the numerical key 5 to 2, 3 to 4, 1 to 6. Next, you write your message into a grid that has the same number of columns as your keyword. For example, the message meet 8T, the bridge 8T midnight would be written out in a 6-column grid. Then you read the columns out, not in order, but in the order of your numerical key. So you would take the first column under the C, then the second column under the first E, then the third under the second E, and so on. This scrambles the message once. Now, you do the entire process a second time. You take the already scrambled message and write it into a new grid using a second keyword. Then you read the columns out in the new scrambled order. This is the double part of the double transposition. The security of this cipher comes from the fact that it shuffles the letters around transposition rather than changing them into other letter substitution. This breaks up the normal letter frequencies of the language. A simple frequency analysis, which is the first step in breaking many simple ciphers, becomes much less effective. The double shuffling makes it incredibly hard to put the letters back in the right order without knowing both keywords. It was a favorite of the French resistance and various special operations executive SOE agents, as recounted in histories like MRD Foot's Sioux in France. Of course, it was not unbreakable. Skilled cryptanalysts could attack it with advanced statistical methods, looking for repeated patterns, or trying to guess likely keywords. But for the purposes of a resistance cell, it was often good enough. A message about a planned sabotage operation only needed to stay secret for a few days. By the time an enemy codebreaker might have a chance to solve it, the bridge would already be down. It was a perfect example of a cipher that provided just enough security for the job it needed to do. What other clever, non-obvious keywords did resistance groups use that were easy to remember but hard to guess? How were these keywords securely shared among cell members? And are there still unsolved double transposition messages from the war sitting in archives, holding secrets we have yet to read? Number 6, how do you hide a message in plain sight? Sometimes the best way to hide a message isn't to scramble it, but to make it invisible. This is the art of steganography, the practice of concealing a file, message, image, or video within another file, message, image, or video. During the war, this took several ingenious forms, blending old-fashioned spycraft with new technology. One of the most famous methods was the microdot. This was a German invention. They developed a process to photographically shrink a page of text down to the size of a speck of dust, a dot no bigger than the period at the end of this sentence. This tiny dot could then be hidden almost anywhere. It could be glued onto a seemingly innocent letter, hidden in the binding of a book, or even placed under a postage stamp. An agent receiving the letter would need a microscope to find the dot and read the message. The head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, called the microdot the enemy's masterpiece of espionage. The story of discovery and fight against this technology is part of the lore of counterintelligence. Another, much older method was invisible ink. Spies used various chemical concoctions that would be invisible when written on paper, but would appear when heated or treated with another chemical. The lemon juice is the classic schoolchild's example, but intelligence agencies developed far more sophisticated formulas. They could create inks that only reacted to a very specific developing agent, or inks that would only appear for a short time before fading again. The challenge for the spy was to write the secret message between the lines of a normal, boring-looking letter without leaving any telltale signs like scratched paper or a faint sheen. These methods had a huge advantage over ciphers. A heavily encrypted message, even if unreadable, is obviously a secret message. It screams, "I am hiding something," to any censor or counterintelligence officer who finds it. But a letter about the weather with a microdot hidden in the signature, or a business contract with a message in invisible ink between the paragraphs, might pass through security checks completely unnoticed. The primary defense was suspicion and forensic analysis. Censors in mailrooms would inspect letters for tiny specks, examine paper under ultraviolet light, or paint it with iodine vapor, hoping to reveal a hidden secret. It was a cat-and-mouse game played out on millions of pieces of paper. Were there any forms of steganography used during the war that were so effective they were never discovered? How many agents were caught, not because their code was broken, but because a tiny speck of film was found on their collar? And what modern equivalents of the microdot are being used in digital espionage today? Number 5. Could a simple weather report sink a battleship? Sometimes, the key to breaking a powerful cipher isn't a direct assault. It's finding a small, weak link in the chain. For the codebreakers at Bletchley Park, one of the most important weak links was the German Navy's weather reporting system. Every day, U-boats and weather ships in the Atlantic would broadcast detailed weather reports back to Germany. These reports were, of course, encrypted using the same Enigma machines as all their other traffic. But the content of the messages was highly predictable. The reports always followed a strict format. They included things like barometric pressure, wind speed, wind direction, and temperature. The codebreakers knew the German words for all these things. They also knew the grid system the German Navy used for locations in the Atlantic. This meant that they had a near-perfect crib, a piece of plain text they knew must be in the ciphertext. For example, they knew the message would almost certainly contain the words weather rehearsage, weather forecast, or FOLT follows. This was a golden opportunity. As described earlier, the bomb machine needed a crib to work. The predictable nature of the weather reports provided these cribs day after day. The codebreakers would take the encrypted weather report, program the likely crib into the bomb, and let the machine run. Once the bomb found the Enigma settings for the weather report, the codebreakers had the key for the entire naval network for that day. They could then use those settings to read all the other more important messages from the U-boats, including their operational orders and patrol locations. The German Navy even helped the codebreakers in another way. They issued sailors with special codebooks for the weather cipher that were printed in water-soluble ink on special paper, designed to be easily destroyed if a ship was captured. But on a few occasions, these codebooks were captured intact. In February 1940, a German U-boat was captured, and in May 1941, the British captured U-110, recovering its Enigma machine and codebooks. These captures, detailed in books like Seizing the Enigma by David Kahn, provided invaluable information that helped the codebreakers understand changes and improvements to the Enigma system. The humble weather report became the skeleton key that unlocked the German Navy's most vital secrets, a crucial factor in winning the Battle of the Atlantic. Did the German High Command ever suspect that their routine weather reports were a major security risk? How many Allied lives were saved because of the intelligence gained specifically from these predictable messages? And what are the modern-day equivalents of the weather report routine, predictable communications that might be the weak point in a strong security system? Number 4, how did one broken code lead to the turning point in the Pacific? In early 1942, the war in the Pacific was going badly for the United States. The Japanese Navy seemed unstoppable. And American intelligence knew that a major Japanese operation was coming, one that aimed to be a decisive blow. But they didn't know where or when. The fate of the war in the Pacific depended on finding the answer. The answer was hidden in the Japanese Navy's main operational code, a complex system codenamed JN-25. JN-25 was not a machine cipher, it was a super-enciphered code. This meant it was a two-part system. First, words and phrases were looked up in a massive codebook, which replaced them with 5-digit numbers. This was the basic code, but to make it secure, a second step was added. A second book, filled with thousands of random 5-digit numbers, was used as an additive key. A number from this second book was added to the codebook number to produce the final encrypted group that was transmitted. To decrypt, the recipient had to subtract the same additive number. To make it even more secure, both the codebook and the additive book were changed regularly. The U.S. Navy's code-breaking unit in Hawaii, known as Station Hypo, led by the eccentric but brilliant Commander Joseph Rochefort, had been working on JN-25 for years. By the spring of 1942, they had made significant progress. They had partially reconstructed both the codebook and the additive book by analyzing vast amounts of intercepted traffic. They could read bits and pieces of messages, but not everything. In the intercepted messages about the upcoming operation, they kept seeing a location designator AF. Rochefort and his team were convinced that AF meant Midway Island, a critical American base, but Washington was skeptical. They needed proof. So Rochefort came up with a clever plan, a brilliant piece of what we now call psychological operations. As told in the book And I Was There by Admiral Edwin T. Layton, Rochefort had the base at Midway send a false message in the clear, using a simple, easily broken code. The message reported that Midway's freshwater distillation plant was broken. A few days later, an intercepted Japanese JN-25 message came through. The codebreakers could only decipher part of it, but it was enough. It said that AF was short on fresh water. That was the proof. The trap had worked. Armed with this definitive intelligence, Admiral Chester Nimitz, the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, was able to position his aircraft carriers to ambush the Japanese fleet. The resulting Battle of Midway in June 1942 was a stunning victory for the United States and is considered the turning point of the war in the Pacific. It was a victory made possible not just by brave pilots and sailors, but by the quiet, tireless work of the codebreakers at Station Hypo. What if Rochefort's brilliant ruse had failed or been discovered? How much of the JN-25 codebook was reconstructed through painstaking analysis versus lucky guesses? And did the Japanese Navy ever realize that their operational plans had been laid bare by a simple message about a broken water pump? Number 3. What was the little pocket-sized device that spies and soldiers used? While giant machines like Colossus and the Bombe were crunching codes at headquarters, soldiers, pilots, and agents in the field needed something simple, portable, and quick. For many British and Commonwealth forces, the answer was a clever little device called the Slidex. It was a small, rectangular case, usually made of bakelite or metal, with a sliding insert. It was essentially a simplified, pocket-sized version of a much larger cipher system. The Slidex system worked with a series of pre-printed cards, one for each day. The card contained a jumbled alphabet. The operator would set a specific letter on the slider to align with a number on the outer case, a setting taken from a daily key list. This would create a simple substitution cipher for that day. For example, an AA night might become a Q, a B, might become in percent, and so on. To make it more secure, the system was reciprocal. If AA became Q, then Q would also become A. This made it easy to use for both encrypting and decrypting. Its security was very low. A determined cryptanalyst could break a Slidex message with relative ease, especially if they had several messages sent with the same key. But that wasn't the point. Slidex wasn't meant for strategic secrets. It was a perishable cipher system. It was designed for messages that needed to be secret for only a few hours. A pilot confirming a target, a forward artillery observer calling in coordinates, or an agent confirming a meeting time. By the time the enemy could intercept, analyze, and break the message, the information would be old and useless. The Slidex highlights a critical concept in wartime cryptography layered security. Not every message needs the protection of a one-time pad or a cigarette machine. The level of security should match the sensitivity and lifespan of the information. Using an overly complex system for a simple tactical message would be slow and inefficient. Using a simple system like Slidex for the plans to an invasion would be catastrophic. The Allied forces used a whole spectrum of systems, from top-level machines to mid-grade devices like the M209, down to simple paper-based systems and pocket devices like Slidex, each chosen for a specific task. How many different versions of the Slidex system were produced, and were any of them captured and exploited? Did operators ever make mistakes in setting the device that led to critical information being leaked? And what simple, good enough cryptographic tools do we still use today in our daily lives without realizing it? Number two, how did they test the loyalty of a machine? The Type X machine was the British equivalent of Enigma. In fact, its development started by modifying a commercial Enigma machine in the 1930s. But the British engineers at the Air Ministry and the company Creed & Company made several crucial improvements that turned it into a much more secure device. It was the workhorse of high-level British and Commonwealth communication throughout the war, a key component of the system that kept Allied strategic plans secret. Like Enigma, Type X was a rotor machine, but it had several advantages. First, it had 5 rotors, not 3, and they were larger. Second, and most importantly, it had a more complex and less predictable stepping mechanism for the rotors, avoiding the regular odometer turnover that was a weakness in Enigma. It also had 2 plug boards for added scrambling, and unlike Enigma, it printed the messages out on paper tape, which was more efficient than having a second operator write down the letters as they lit up. A key feature that was a direct lesson from early analysis of Enigma was that Type X was designed so that a letter could not be encrypted as itself, which removed a major clue for codebreakers. One of the most interesting stories about Type X involves its integration with the American cipher system. As the US and Britain became closer allies, they needed a way to share top-secret intelligence securely. But the American SIGIBA and the British Type X were different machines. They couldn't talk to each other. Building an entirely new system would take too long. So they came up with an ingenious solution called the Combined Cipher Machine, or CCM. Engineers developed a special adapter that would allow a Type X machine to be configured to act like a SIGIBA machine, and vice versa. This meant the two allies could communicate at the highest level of security using their own native hardware. It was a remarkable feat of technical diplomacy, detailed in the files of the National Archives. The security of Type X was never broken by Axis forces during the war. It, along with SIGIBA, formed the secure backbone of Allied command and control. This cryptographic superiority was a quiet but decisive advantage. While Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park were reading the enemy's mail, the Axis codebreakers were staring at a wall of unbreakable gibberish from the Type X and SIGIBA machines. The intellectual battlefront was, in this regard, a one-sided fight. Were there any design flaws in Type X that were discovered by the British but never exploited by the enemy? How did the logistics of distributing the key settings for thousands of Type X machines across a global empire actually work? And what would have happened if a CCM adapter had fallen into enemy hands? Number 1, what if the greatest weapon in the Code War wasn't a code at all? The story of the Code War is often told as a series of brilliant breakthroughs against specific ciphers. But perhaps the most mind-bending code of all wasn't a system for hiding information, but a system for finding it. This code was the intellectual and industrial process developed at Bletchley Park itself. It was a human machine made of thousands of people, organized to turn raw enemy signals into finished, actionable intelligence, codenamed Ultra. The process began with the Y stations, a network of wireless intercept posts scattered across Britain and around the world. These stations listened to the airwaves 24 hours a day, transcribing the endless streams of Morse code and radio teleprinter chatter from enemy forces. This raw material, mountains of encrypted messages, was then sent by motorcycle courier to Bletchley Park. There, the messages were sorted, cataloged, and sent to the right hut for analysis. Hut 6, for example, worked on German Army and Air Force Enigma, while Hut 8, where Alan Turing worked, focused on the more complex Navajo Enigma. Once a message was decrypted, it wasn't the end of the process, it was just the beginning. The raw decrypts in German were sent to another group of experts for translation, analysis, and interpretation. These were historians, linguists, and military experts who understood the context. They could piece together fragments from different messages to build a bigger picture, the location of a division, the fuel status of a U-boat, or the technical specifications of a new tank. As documented in a study by the Center for Cryptologic History, this fusion of decryption and analysis was what made Ultra so powerful. The final and perhaps most critical step was distributing the intelligence without revealing its source. If a U-boat convoy was suddenly attacked by Allied planes at a prearranged rendezvous point in the middle of the Atlantic, the German command would quickly suspect their codes were broken. So a complex system of cover stories was created. A reconnaissance plane would be accidentally sent to discover the U-boats before the attack. This made the enemy believe their losses were due to bad luck or superior Allied reconnaissance, not to compromise ciphers. The secret of Ultra was guarded above almost all else. This entire system, from interception to decryption, analysis, and secure distribution, was the real weapon. It was an intelligence factory, the first of its kind. The individual codes were just puzzles. The Bletchley Park system was the machine for solving them at an industrial scale, turning an enemy's greatest strength, their secure communications, into their greatest weakness. How many Allied military decisions were made that seemed brilliant on the surface, but were actually based entirely on secret ultra-intelligence? What was the psychological toll on the thousands of people who worked in total secrecy at Bletchley Park, unable to even speak about their vital work for decades? And what is the one secret of Bletchley Park, the one breakthrough or technique that remains classified and unknown to us even today?